Hello everyone and welcome to this lecture. We are looking at the demand theory. So it's a very interesting theory that it is what economics is all about. Whenever we talk about the demand theory and the supply theory, but in this case we are looking at the demand theory. So first of all, what is demand? We need to define what is demand. So it's known as the quantity of a good or service consumers are willing and able to buy at a given price over a given time period. So consumers must be both willing and able to buy something so that demand can be effective in economics. So consumers must be both willing and able to buy something for demand to be effective in economics. So they must be willing to buy something, they must be willing and able to buy something at a given price over a given time period. So that is the proper definition of demand. Learn it so that you will be absolutely sure about the definition of demand. So there's a pattern that we use that studies consumer behavior, that studies consumer spending, which is known as the law of demand. So the law of demand states that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. What do they mean by inverse relationship? Inverse relationship is all about understanding that as prices increases, quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa, assuming a ceteris paribus. Okay, so the idea is to understand that the law of demand states that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So when prices go up, quantity demanded decreases. When prices go down, quantity demanded increases. That is what we mean by inverse relationship. So we want to isolate that on the diagram, assuming ceteris paribus, other things being equal, other things being unchanged, only focusing on price as a factor affecting demand. So let's see how the price changes can be shown on the demand curve. The shape of the demand curve itself is downward sloping to show that there is an inverse relationship. You should understand that the shape of the demand curve is downward sloping because of the inverse relationship. So I want to put an initial price of let's say this was P1 and Q1. Let's put a price increase to here. And what is going to happen to the quantities? Let's say this was now P2. There was a price increase. As you can see, quantity demanded is decreased from Q1 to Q2. Then let's show another price decrease from P1 to P3 respectively. Like this, you can see that quantity will increase. So that's how you show price changes on the demand curve. So this is all happening because of this assumption of ceteris paribus, other things being equal, other things are being unchanged. So this assumption allows us to get to the law of demand as a theory. So as a theory, that's how we isolate the price as a factor affecting demand, knowing that there are clearly other factors which can also affect demand, but the assumptions allows us to remain those factors to remain constant, to remain unchanged, only focusing on one factor affecting demand. In this case, we are looking at price. So this assumption allows us to get to the law of demand as a theory. So what you should know is that because of the assumption, looking at price as a factor affecting demand, we are going to see a movement along the demand curve. Yeah, this is the movement along the demand curve. So when price increases from P1 to P2, we see a movement along the demand curve. So in this case, this was a contraction of demand. It is a contraction of demand. As demand contracts going upwards like this, you can see quantity demand is decreased from Q1 to Q2. It's already the contraction of demand. Then when prices fall from P1 to P3, we see extension of demand. Extension of demand. So you should know these movements well, because those movements are very important for you to understand whenever you consider talking about the law of supply as a theory, assuming ceteris paribus. You should know the movement along the demand curve when you are isolating price as a factor affecting demand. So that's how you isolate prices, like that. So you should know that those are the changes. Then another thing that we want to talk about is that why do we have the downward sloping curve of the demand curve like that? Why is it downward sloping like this? Why is it downward sloping? So it's because of two effects, the income effect in the substitution effect. So the income effect, let's take like a price increase, right? So price have increased from P1 to P2. So you can see that quantities decrease from Q1 to Q2 is because that the incomes of individuals or income of customers isn't changed, but the price of the goods that they're consuming is now increased. So their income cannot stretch further to cover that gap. Their income cannot be able to satisfy, to buy the same quantities of a good or service they were demanding before. So that's why they are failing to demand more at that increase in price. That is what we mean by the income effect. Then by the substitution effect, it's all about understanding that is if the price of another substitute increases, let's take a price increase in this case, we are going to see that people are going to switch their consumption into buying another substitute. They are going to switch their consumption into buying another substitute, because right now that substitute they are leaving that substitute because right now there's another substitute which is now more competitive elsewhere. So that's how you isolate the issue of substitution effect. So we're also going to look at if prices were to decrease, the effect on income effect and substitution effect will be the opposite of what I have just said. So in income effect, your income will stretch further when where prices have fallen. On substitution effect, the substitute will be highly demanded, which prices have fallen. So that's how we talk about why the demand curve is downward sloping. So it's a very favored exam question. They will ask you, why is the demand curve downward sloping? So you should be able to understand that because of these two effects, the income effect and the substitution effect. So as you know that there is clearly other factors which can also affect demand other than price. So we are now dropping the assumption of ceteris paribus, allowing other factors to affect demand, right? Those factors, we call them the non-price factors. So let's go to them. Here they are. So those non-price factors, they are called non-price factors because they affect demand independently of price, right? At the same price, demand can either increase, shifting to the right, or decrease, shifting to the left in this case. So they affect demand independently of price. We see demand increasing and demand decreasing, right? And quantity demand also increasing and decreasing. So what are those non-price factors? So I have developed this memory device here for you guys that is Pacific. It's spelled wrong on purpose for you to get a memory device about the Pacific world, understanding that it's a memory device that can help you remember all the determinants of demand, all the non-price factors which affect demand. So in this case, we are talking about population. So how can you say, well, so what you do when you pick up a factor, you tell us how that factor increases demand, how that factor decreases demand. And isolating that relationship, that explanation using this diagram, right? So if we pick out population, if you're saying that if population increases, demand for goods and services is also going to increase, which will increase demand from T0 to T1. Whereas if population decreases in a country, demand for goods and services also decrease, which will shift demand from T1 to T3. Simple as that, right? So that's how you isolate. So the most important thing is you should understand how you label your axis of your prices and quantities, right? And be able to know that how you label your demand curves, they are all in exact proportion as they are supposed to be explained, right? Then we have advertising. We are saying that if there is good advertising, if advertising moves towards a particular good or service, advertising that have touched a lot of people, that have caused an impact on customers to behave rationally, because consumers are always behaving rationally. So this is increased demand from T1 to T2. Whereas if advertising moves away from a particular good or service, there's been a bad report, there's been a bad advertising about the good or service, so demand will decrease from T1 to T3. So that's how we isolate advertising. Then we have what we call substitute price. Substitute price about saying that a substitute is a good which is in competition with another good, a good which can be used in place of another good. So we're talking about let's say in this case we have Coke and Pepsi. So these are the two classic substitute examples that I can give you. So what you should understand is that you assume that this demand curve here is for the other substitute. Let's say this demand curve is for Coke. This is the demand for Coke. So let's say that if Pepsi, another substitute, increases, people will demand more of Coke because remember, substitutes don't change prices at the same time. If the other substitute increases price, the other one will not increase price, it will remain at the price that it was. That's why I'm saying that if the price of Pepsi increases, demand for Coke will increase from D1 to D2. But if the price of Pepsi decreases, demand for Coke will decrease from D1 to D3, as people will be switching their demand towards Pepsi instead. So that's what you should understand about substitutes, right? That's how you should explain substitute price. Then we go to income. We have to talk about two distinct goods, which are inferior goods and normal goods. So if I take a normal good is that good which when income rises, demand rises also. So if income rises, demand for normal goods will increase from D1 to D2. We are talking, for example, like a luxury car, right? So is when income decreases, its demand will decrease from D1 to D3. But for the inferior, it has the opposite relationship with the income. It says that when income rises, its demand will decrease from D1 to D3, but when income falls, its demand will increase from D1 to D2. So it has a negative relationship with income. So you should understand that normal goods have a positive relationship with income, and inferior goods have a negative relationship with income, right? So that's how we explain those two distinct goods. Then we talk about fashion and taste, that if fashion moves towards a particular good or service, demand will increase from D1 to D2. But if fashion moves towards a particular good or service, I'm saying that demand will increase from D1 to D2. But if a fashion moves away from a particular good or service, demand will decrease from D1 to D3. Okay, then we go to interest rate. Interest rate, remember, is the cost of borrowing and the rate of return on savings. So in this case, I'm just trying to say that if consumers, let's say, have to borrow money for them to spend in the economy, let's say they will be spending on buying houses, on buying a luxury car, so sort of things like that, like taking out holidays. So if interest rates are reduced, the cost of borrowing also falls. This increases demand for loans. Demand will increase from D1 to D2. But when interest rate rises, it becomes more expensive for people to borrow money. Demand will decrease from D1 to D3, right? So the last determinant or the non-price factor is complement price. So what you have to know about complement are those goods which are used together, like printer and printer ink, right? So let's assume that this demand curve is for printer ink. Then if the price of printers increases, demand for printer ink will decrease from D1 to D3. It's because it's not the price of printers. It's not the price of printer ink that has changed. It's the price of printers that have changed that is causing an impact on printer ink. So if the price of printers also decreases, demand for printer ink will increase from D1 to D2 because they are used together. You can't use the printer without the ink. You can't use the ink without the printer. So that's how they work, right? So that is the demand theory, guys, covered fully. So remember, Pacific World, you'll be absolutely ready for demand theory. Any question that can come about demand theory. So what you should isolate here is that the distinct difference is that non-price factors cause the demand curve to shift to the right, whereas the price causes a movement along the demand curve, right? When we are isolating the law of demand as it is, right? That's how you explain those points, right? So thank you so much for watching, guys. I'm going to do the same thing for supply theory, so stay tuned for the next video when we do the same thing for supply theory. So thank you so much for watching, guys. Thank you.